inch of my time.
Let me ask you this. Now, you sat through the whole BTK trial?
No, only the sentencing.
Only the sentencing. No.
Well, he pled guilty.
Right. No, right. But let me ask you a question, because even in the sentencing phase, something always. Do you think he acted alone?
Oh, absolutely. I know he did.
What do you make of those pictures of him in bondage? How was he able to take those pictures? He's in women's clothing and lingerie and bondage, tied up, buried in dirt.
He actually staged it. They talked about it during the sentencing.
Yeah.
He staged it. And he had a camera set up in the basement of his parents' house, and he was able to put the camera on a tripod and actually stage it so he could take pictures of himself in his victim's underwear and with his victim's clothing on and bondage and all of that. He was that sick. He actually at one point dug a grave, and apparently the victim he was planning on killing didn't work out for him, if you want to say it that way. And apparently he got into the grave and twisted himself up into this shallow grave and took pictures of himself in there.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Oh, you saw that?
Yeah, okay. and that's why I'm wondering. Now, they explained this to you in a way that you were convinced that he did this over.
Absolutely convinced. Okay. Absolutely convinced this man acted alone. In fact, I was with the Kansas State investigation people. I was not just with the Wichita police. I was with every state has their own investigation arm. In other words, like there's the FBI, but then there's the KBI, Kansas Bureau of Investigation. There's every state has their own Bureau of Investigation locally, and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation people, I mean, we went to the locations where this man pulled off these murders. We talked about beyond what went on at the sentencing, what was revealed, and I will tell you this, he would sit and wait and watch a person's house, and he would spend weeks. Apparently he must have told them this, but there's no question in my mind, weeks watching their every move. And eventually what he did, he had a 5-minute timer. He would go break into the back of the house, and if the person didn't show up on their routine within 5 minutes, he left. And there was one woman who actually got home, and what he did is he cut all the phone cords. This is back in time, there were no cell phones. Cut all the phone cords, was in the house, and, with his accoutrement, his stocking on his head, and just the boogeyman is beyond, we can't even call him that, I don't know what you call him. And one woman came home in the midst of the 30 years, and all the signs were there that BTK was there. The lines were cut. She had altered her pattern. She called her son. He came over, and she had come home after the 5-minute window, like maybe 10 minutes later or something, and they knew his operandi enough that they realized it was him. The son took her out of the house, and the woman never went back into the house, ever. Somebody else had to go in and move her stuff out.
Oh, boy.
I mean, this is the kind of thing. Also, he had a very creepy thing he did. He would take photographs from magazines and cut out the face, and he would paste it onto like a cardboard, and he would drive around in his car with the face of somebody as he's driving around like that was his friend. But what he was doing was looking for someone out there in the streets that looked like this person. Okay? I mean, the stuff I found out on him, on Dennis Rader, is so creepy, so bizarre. Frankly, no movie has done it justice. No book that I know of. I can't say that because I haven't read any books. I don't want to know more about it. I know too much. I know enough to know this guy acted alone. There's no doubt in my mind. There were caches of these weird pictures found in the police precinct office that he had. All the mementos, his creepy taunting of the police, very Zodiac-like, and but worse. Because ultimately, at some point, he killed someone that lived 5 houses down from him. So he was just getting more brazen and more brazen and more brazen over years. And, no one helped him.
Okay.
I don't believe it. I wouldn't believe it.
Now, you discuss about how you have sympathy for the victims, all right? Extraordinary sympathy, or empathy, you might call it. But yet, in the Michael Jackson case, I guess you started out like everybody else Assuming.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So then how'd you come to this place? 'Cause I tell you the truth, when I booked this interview, all my interviews about Michael Jackson have always been that he's guilty. And I'm convinced he's guilty. So, and I was shocked to see this today. So convince me. Go ahead.
Oh, well, there's no question that he was innocent. Let me tell you, that trial in Santa Maria, actually it was in Santa Barbara County, was such a circus. It was such a sham that really the media should be ashamed all the way across the board for having done what they did. It was like a lynching of Michael Jackson, and I'll tell you why. Everyone went there with the preconceived notion that he was guilty, which, by the way, is not the way we're supposed to handle trials. But okay, it's the media. However, everybody also only wanted to cover what was the most salacious, the most damning, the most potentially damning information of the trial. And that went also for my work at Fox News, where they only wanted me on when it was, the most damning information. And if I had anything to say that was exculpatory-ish, which I wasn't really believing he wasn't guilty throughout the trial, so I didn't have a lot to say, but even if I wanted to reveal some things that seemed exculpatory, there was no interest in that from the producers. Because that's the mentality everybody seemed to have in covering that trial. It was like Casey Anthony, where all of us believe she was guilty, and I still believe she's guilty. But, the surprise at the end that she didn't get found guilty was, shocking.
I wasn't surprised one bit. I predicted that. They never proved even cause of death in that case.
You're right.
Yeah.
And so it turned out that way. And I actually did an episode on it on True Crime, if you ever get a chance to see it.
I'd love to get you back on show about that, because I want to do a Casey Anthony show, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we can do that. I covered that entire trial. I was there gavel to gavel. Nonetheless, back to Michael Jackson. Here's the thing. When the jury came back not guilty, I had my jaw dropping like everybody else. But as they continued to say not guilty for all 14 counts, there was literally a curtain came up from over my eyes. It was like all of a sudden I realized the emperor had no clothes. The emperor being Tom Sneddon, the prosecutor. Why? Because this family of accusers had gone after Chris Tucker, who testified, George Lopez, who testified, Jay Leno, who testified, and I can continue to name more. Larry King, who overheard, and their lawyer, who they hired. Guess who they hired? Larry Feldman, who was the lawyer for Jordy Chandler. They didn't go to the police about being sexually molested. They went to Larry Feldman, Jordy Chandler's lawyer. How coincidental that they get to Michael Jackson after they've already bilked, because the kid had cancer. They bilked George Lopez. He testified to it. They bilked Chris Tucker on the set of Rush Hour, and they wanted hotels, and they wanted to move hotels, and they wanted this, and they wanted that, and Lopez was doing charity drives for them for blood, and it turns out they had insurance. They didn't need that for blood, ba-ba. Everybody that testified had another story. Jay Leno said it was a Make-A-Wish request, and he said the kids sounded overly effusive. Those were Leno's words. And if you remember, Leno was making a career out of making fun of Michael Jackson being a pedophile back then. He testified as a witness for the defense really only because they had him on tape saying what he was saying with the kid. And so, the truth was that this kid, Gavin Arvizo, and the family were living in the barrio of L.A., East L.A., in a one-room apartment, a studio. So it's 3 kids and 2 parents, 5 people in a studio apartment. The kid winds up with cancer. He somehow goes to a camp where he's at a comedy store where all these performers are performing, Leno and Tucker and Lopez, etc., gain access to these people. After they go through whatever they can to get monies and favors and freebies and charity drives out of these people and others, local L.A. celebrities, then they hit the biggest mark of all, Michael Jackson. Bingo! Michael Jackson at that time wanted desperately to repair his image. He couldn't get through the payment he made to Jordy Chandler in the 90s. It's now in the 2000s. He desperately wants to have a makeover. He wants to get past it. He can't. Martin Bashir, enter Martin Bashir, Mr. Wonderful, who's done the only documentary on Princess Diana. And, of course, Michael loves to be a celebrity, loves to be thinking of himself as royalty, falls in love with this guy Bashir, invites him to the United States. They make a deal, unbeknownst to any of Jackson's people, that Bashir will have complete and total access to Jackson for, I don't know how long, a year? And during that time, he's not paying a dime. Jackson's doing it for free. Since when does a superstar do things for free? Because Bashir has convinced him, and this is all on tape. I've seen the tapes. We have full tapes of their interviews that were never seen on Bashir's documentary.
How'd you get that?
To us in court.
Where'd you get that from?
It was shown in court.
Okay.
2.5 hours of footage that was never seen.
Okay. So you got that from the defense then, or you watched it in court?
I watched it in court, and I also have a copy.
And you got a copy,
in
okay.
my safe. Yes, I do. I do. So here's the thing: is Bashir convinced Michael Jackson, because Michael always had the thing he never had a childhood, which he didn't. I met Joe Jackson. He's beyond a monster. I can't even explain. Not the kind of a killer monster, but just a sociological monster, okay? And we know Michael didn't have a childhood. He talked about it in the Bashir tapes, blah, blah, blah. And they're not tapes, they're videotapes. You see Michael. And he wanted to have what he called an international children's holiday, because in his mind, children weren't paid enough attention to, and especially children all over the world who are suffering and are, in third world countries. And so he wanted to have an international children's holiday in which everything was about the child, that, they could play, they could not go to school, they could have, special events.
And bedtime story.
Sorry?
It was in his Bill of Rights. They should all have a bedtime story.
Oh, I don't know about a bedtime story.
No, he had a Bill of Rights he wanted for children, that they all should have a bedtime story.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't. Do you see? You know more about that than I do. That was not brought up in the Bashir tapes. What was brought up was this international children's holiday.
Right.
And Michael talked specifically about things that he wanted children to have. And Bashir kept referring to it and saying, yes, we're going to talk about your special holiday and what you want to do for children, all the work you've done for children, which, by the way, Michael Jackson did give to hospitals and children and go in person and bring toys and stuffed animals. No one ever knows about that because no one ever heard about it, because that wasn't interesting. But he did do it all his life. And, so here's this family. Think about this. The Bashir documentary airs. Number one, Bashir picked that family because Michael had already helped the kid when he was in a wheelchair with no hair in his head, and that's when he brought them to Neverland to help this kid through his cancer. It wasn't until after the Bashir documentary aired that this family was long gone from Michael Jackson's life, that suddenly, because Bashir managed to get the kid on the same bed with Michael, have them hold hands, which apparently, according to the family who testified, said was set up by Bashir, had them hold hands. They didn't testify to it. They talked about it in a taped interview for Michael Jackson before the trial. Then they changed the story in the trial. But the tape was shown to us. I also have a copy of that. The Arvizo family and Mrs. Arvizo, Janet Arvizo, the mother, said that Bashir put their hands together, suggested that they hold hands. Now you have that moment where he asked them, so do you sleep in the bed together? And Michael, trying to make up for the past, says, oh, yes, we do. We have milk and cookies, and it's all wonderful and innocent. Boom. That thing goes viral. It goes around the globe. The whole world is calling Michael Jackson CBS president, every president of every network, Barbara Walters, 60 Minutes, you name it. Of course they can't get through to Michael. Michael's people are horrified. How did he do this documentary without even telling anyone? The one thing he did do is hire his own videographer to tape everything just as a safety, which is what I'm talking about, what I have, okay? That's the only thing he did. That was his safeguard. Bashir ran with that, and he was the first person to testify, called to the witness stand by the prosecution at the trial. It was that documentary that led those people, the Arvizos, to go after Michael Jackson, not as a criminal because they didn't report him to police, but for the money, because they